Today on the Transplant Helper, we're going to be discussing the topic of diabetes and its relationship to living the post-transplant life. Is it possible I'll become a diabetic after transplant? Is it even likely? And if so, will it be long-term or short? What can be done about it? What do I need to do? How will it be diagnosed? Those are all the types of questions we're going to be addressing today, so go ahead and stay tuned. Hey folks, welcome to Transplant Helper again today. My name is Jim Merle, and today we are discussing the very important topic of diabetes and its relationship to living the post-transplant life. Now, I'll admit to you that even though I dealt with this back some 4.5 years ago after my transplant in a big way, it's not honestly something I've thought about too many times until the last week or so when I received 3 questions by 3 different people, all concerning the topic, one of which who looked me directly in the eyes face to face and said, "Jim, you didn't tell me about this." And that's when I thought about it, and I thought, you know what? I haven't done a program on this yet, so I thought today would be the ideal time to address this subject and help you understand this possibility of being a diabetic post-transplant a little bit better. Now, let me say in the onset, just to cut to the chase, there is a high likelihood, it's not completely sure, but there's a high likelihood that after transplant for a period of time that you might become, on paper at least, a type 2 diabetic. Now, the good news is that even though your blood sugars may spike, you may have a lot of problems with your blood sugars shortly after transplant, generally speaking, outside of a few months post-transplant, the symptoms will subside, they'll forget all about it, and you'll move on. With the exception of the fact that if you've been a diabetic pre-transplant, more than likely you're not only going to carry that condition through transplant, it may get a little bit worse. So use extreme caution when facing transplant if you're already a diabetic. Just know it can be still managed, but it may need to be managed in a whole different way. Now, for those of us like myself who never suffered from any kind of diabetes pre-transplant, post-transplant, it became, for a time, a real problem. But it wasn't because I was suddenly eating chocolate cake every day, shoving in pies and cookies, although I do some of that, by the way. It wasn't really because of that. It was simply because of the fact that some of my medications, particularly the steroids that most of us are on post-transplant, prednisone, at those high levels, they can cause blood sugar problems and even cause you to become, again, kind of a type 2 diabetic, at least on paper. What I mean by that, when you're taking steroids at a lower dose, say you go into the local doctor, maybe you got a cold or something like that, they give you a shot of steroid, maybe a pack of steroid along with some antibiotics, you take that for a week or so, you're probably not going to have that much problem with that. However, as a transplant patient, when we're taking extremely high doses of that, sometimes 65, 75, 80 milligrams a pop, every time we take that, and we're taking that for longer periods of time as one of our major, believe it or not, anti-rejection meds, it can be an issue. That point in time, as those levels raise, the levels of the prednisone in your bloodstream raise, it can also cause big problems with your blood sugars, causing them not only to be elevated overall, but especially those spikes. And I mean by that, those spikes are directly related with taking your medication. For example, you take your medication in the morning, 8, 9 o'clock. By 10 or 11 o'clock, even though you've not yet ate anything that would normally cause a blood sugar spike, your blood sugar, like mine would, might be 250, 300, 350, way on up there in the neighborhood of becoming very dangerous. And so, like it was for me during transplant period, while I was still in the hospital at least, I can remember many a times they'd come in, prick my finger, check the blood sugar. Within moments, they'd rush back in with a shot of the insulin. Bam, they'd hit me in the leg with that, trying to get it down. They'd do as much as they could to bring those blood levels down. So let me tell you in the onset, don't be panicked. As a matter of fact, consider yourself normal, average, or typical if you have blood sugar spikes and even are called a diabetic after transplant. But what's really important is not just those pricks of the finger, those periodic blood sticks where they notice those elevated spiking levels. That's a big deal, and it can be dangerous if they're way up or way down, obviously. But what really matters is what's known as your A1C. Now, basically, the A1C is a long-term effect of the blood sugars in your body. It has to do with a hemoglobin. It has to do with the blood sugars that are attached to your blood cells, whatever that is. I'm not a medical doctor. Keep that in mind always. I'm just living the life here. But nonetheless, the A1C is often checked Generally, post-transplant, it's checked every time you go into the clinic, so maybe every 2, 3, 4 months. But in the hospital, it may be checked every week or so. And really what the A1C does is it tries to get a ballpark of what your overall absorbed blood sugars are over a long period of time. Like my coordinator used to joke with me. She used to say, when I check your A1C next month, I'm going to find out if you ate a dozen cookies or not. You couldn't hide anything in that. You may go into the clinic and your blood sugar check be, 70, but your A1C, if it was elevated, that was a problem. And typically speaking, when it comes to A1C numbers, and that is an overall picture of what your blood sugars are like, that's what decides whether or not you're considered not a diabetic, pre-diabetic, or a diabetic, and those levels basically follow this pattern. That is, if your A1C checks to be less than a 5.7, there's no worries, you're normal. If it checks between 5.7 and 6.4, you're considered pre-diabetic, and 6.5 and up, you're considered an all-out type 2 diabetic, and if that's the case, they're going to be treating you with insulin. Now, in general, here's what generally happens, and again, everybody's different. Your case may be altogether different, so please, I'm not arguing with what happened to you, but generally what's going to happen post-transplant is because of the elevated prednisone levels and a few other drugs knocking things out of whack, as we say, you're going to have those elevated blood sugars overall, and especially those spikes that go way up really quickly. And when that occurs, they may give you some short-term insulin. While you're in the hospital, maybe even go home on some insulin, just some shots needed here and there by those blood sugar checks. But as far as your A1C, they may prescribe you a daily pill, which will help a lot for it. And there are different forms. I'm just using one form, for example, something known as glimepiride or Amaryl, which will definitely help out. That's just something, a pill that you pop in the morning, maybe in the evening, whatever the regimen is, but usually about once a day. You pop the pill. It generally tries to level those blood sugars out. It doesn't necessarily bring them way down, although that is a potential danger there, that it uses the opposite effect and your blood sugars come way down. It generally just tries to balance things. And so instead of having those spikes during the day of 250, 300, and then the lows of, say, 60, 70, maybe things are balanced, say 120, 130. And that's not a comfortable range for most of us, but it can be considered normal. So basically, to recap what I've said so far, there's a high likelihood you could become a type 2 diabetic or pre-diabetic post-transplant. If that occurs, it's definitely treatable if you've never dealt with that before. They'll do that through insulin shots short-term, maybe a glimepiride or Amaryl long-term or some other drug. And then here's the thing. It will likely not be a permanent situation. You will have to, however, watch your diet, be careful, not eat too many sugars, obviously, those sorts of things. Making sure that what sugars you do eat, they're kind of balanced. I mean by that, don't get up in the morning and eat a bowl of, Captain Crunch for breakfast, obviously, and then at lunchtime, eat a salad. That's not going to do it, because you got the really high blood sugars in the morning, which are not good, and then really no sugar coming in midday. That's going to drop things and bottom things out. And of course, there's a spike that it causes a crash in the middle. Not good. You'll feel like just trash, okay? So don't do that. But watch your blood sugars, try to balance them. But let me add to that while this is happening, inside of that first few months window, while this is happening, although we do need to watch our diets carefully and closely, rest assured in knowing there's not a lot that you're doing or can do in your diet to change this. If it's medication-based by the prednisone and these other drugs combined, more than likely there's not a lot you can do about it. So although I wouldn't be sitting around eating cakes and cookies and pies, at the same time, going cold turkey on sugar all the time, every day, avoiding everything is not going to do a lot to change that. Now, that's a better diet. Don't get me wrong. However, you're not going to make a huge world of difference in this issue for this reason, because it's not a diet-based problem to begin with. Now, again, I think this is an issue that has to be known about. It's kind of hard to deal with, although the medical field can help you out. Your transplant team obviously can help you out, and it's something you need to be monitoring for yourself. I've had a blood sugar kit in my bag for years. Post-transplant, I still check my blood sugar on occasion. If I'm not feeling right, it can be a measure of a lot of things, and especially when you're having those down moments, the lower blood sugars or the highs can make you feel one way or another. Anyway, I just want to make you aware of that. Don't panic if you find out you're supposedly a diabetic post-transplant. Yeah, if you are, you've just joined the crowd of all of us, most of us at least. And if it happens, it'll probably be short term. And what they'll do about it, just some medications, standard things like insulin and such. You'll probably be fine in a few months, but take care of yourself. I hope this has helped you out in some way. If it has, how about go ahead and like this program, give it a big thumbs up, subscribe to the program. If so, maybe hit the bell notification over there to the side of that so you can be notified every time I put out new content, new programs that will hopefully advocate, educate, and motivate you as a transplant patient. And then basically today at the end, question of the day. Did you deal with blood sugar issues post-transplant? If so, did they consider you a diabetic? And how long did it last? I'd like to hear about it. Just leave your comment below this video, and I'll be more than happy to reply and share in this community of the Transplant Helper as we help one another to live better lives. And until next time, please stay stronger, friends.